So when you're at diploma level, the CII is testing your knowledge. So they want to know that you've understood what's in the syllabus. And essentially the way they test you on that is for you to say it back to them in a different way. So when you're doing the coursework, they're asking you questions, and the answers to those questions will absolutely be something that you can find within the book. When it comes to the multiple choice, same thing. The answers will be things that you can find in the book. And this is quite different to advanced diploma, because when you look at advanced diploma, they're actually testing you on your application of knowledge. So by application of knowledge, what we're looking at there is they can give you a concept. You can learn the concept from the book. You can research it on your own outside of what the CII is telling you. And most importantly, you can apply that to a real life scenario, usually on the business you're working for. So when we are looking at diploma coursework, if you do feel like you are finding it hard to motivate yourself because you're essentially finding answers and applying them from information in the book, that is absolutely right. You're doing the right thing. So diploma coursework, the word count is slightly varied depending on the module you're on. So it's worth just double checking that on your modules, but you're looking at between 10,000 and 12,000. And students often struggle, they often go over this. So if you are starting to write your first piece of coursework, this might surprise you how quickly you found yourself expanding over that. The CII are very strict on this. And in fact, if you go over 10% of your word count, they will stop reading and stop marking your answers. So you do need to make sure you're monitoring that really closely. What you can do with word count is actually include diagrams to actually illustrate your point, and diagrams aren't included within your word count. One just thing to caveat that with, if you do include a table, then any text within that table will count towards that word count. So using some diagrams is a brilliant way of making sure you can sum up your point using less words and save you that kind of clarity piece coming through. You're going to get 10 questions. And again, this is going to vary depending on your module, but the marks will vary, 10 marks to 30 marks. And this is really important to be considering as you're looking at your word count, particularly where you're looking at reducing it. So you absolutely want to make sure you have enough information in those big questions. So where you're looking for 30 marks, you will need to be saying a lot more information. And I'm going to show you how that breaks down a little bit more with some of the other questions there. Of course, you've got your 6 months coursework timeframe there and your 18 months period to do the exam. One thing I would really encourage you to do is book your exam not too long after doing the coursework. The coursework is a brilliant way of revising because you are learning the material, you're using your own words to say it back to somebody else. And that level of knowledge will set you up really nicely for the exam. So if you do have quite a delay between doing that coursework and the exam, you might find you're actually forgetting some things and then having to relearn them. So really, as we look at the CII, and in fact, as we look at it as a whole, the more momentum, so the more continuous you are between each stage, the less effort you'll need to put in at the next stage because more information is going to be fresh to you. And then you've got your pass mark, which is essentially 60%. So 60% that we're aiming for. One thing that I like to do in terms of looking towards this pass mark when I've completed assignments is to essentially mark myself. So once I complete the assignment, once I've got in my word count, I go through with a red pen and a printed out piece of paper and pretend I'm the marker and then look to make sure I've got the right amount of points in each section and see where I think I am worthy of a tick. And then I'll tally those up to see that I'm enough over what the pass mark is. And then that will allow you to see where there might be some gaps, some areas where you need to make sure you're addressing a little bit more specifically. Now, when it comes to looking at how the coursework is put together against the book, there is something that the CII do clearly put out in their specimens and in their learning outcomes, but it doesn't necessarily, when you're looking at it with common sense, apply directly to the book. And this is the issue, that your questions won't necessarily align to the chapter. Questions align to learning outcomes. Learning outcomes are essentially the list that the CII wants you to be able to prove that you know enough of to pass the syllabus. And sometimes those learning outcomes will fit with each chapter, but sometimes they will actually come from more than one chapter or chapters at different parts of the book. So I've got M92 and MO5 on here as likely ones that most people will be doing or looking at doing, and we can see how these vary. So here we have chapter 1, learning outcome 1. Brilliant. So we know question 1 is actually aligning to chapter 1 in this case. But as soon as we get on to question 2, although we're on learning outcome 2, this is actually coming from chapters 2 and 3. And as we go on to number 3, we're on to number 4. And then as we're on number 6, we're on 7 and 8. So we can see by the time we get to the end, chapter 8, it's learning outcome 8, question 8, we're on chapter 10. Now, this is really worth having a look at before you go in and answer each question, just to double check you're looking in the right place. I know students who have spent a lot of time looking for the answer and looking for the section and getting frustrated because actually they feel like the answer isn't in the book. And once you go back and align it to this, it makes it a little bit clearer. Once we are into the MO5 book, we can see that chapter 1 actually isn't coming through there on a question. Your knowledge from chapter 1 will be a grounded knowledge that will help you as you come through, particularly as potentially you're looking at these sections. But on its own, it's not going to be a learning outcome. So the first thing you should do is you look at each question, you take them one at a time, is go into this section within the Specimen coursework questions and work out where these are aligning from. So I'm going to show you within the CII website where you can actually find these pages. Okay, so if we are here and we're in the CII's page, we want to go into the Specimen coursework assignment. As we open this one up, these are brilliant. Now, I know when you enroll on the CII, you get sent so many documents and so many emails, it can be hard to work out which ones are worth going through and prioritising. Absolutely, please look through these. They give you such good guidance, especially for people that haven't written coursework for quite some time. They really take that into account. The reason that we do coursework now, we call it the mixed assignment, is actually to allow a bit more balance for different learning styles, different types of learners. So it's a bit fairer for everybody, and we're testing across different things. And the CII really try to make sure that those people who haven't been in education for quite some time, or maybe haven't done any kind of further education, aren't disadvantaged, and they do that by giving lots of guidance. So if we go through this document here, and you'll have one of these for each module, you'll see there is a breakdown of lots of advice for you on how to actually complete the question and things to consider. Lots of rules here. We'll go through most of these today. In fact, we've gone through most of them, so we're through that list quite quickly. And then some tips in terms of step-by-step what you want to do and how you want to approach it. Again, I'm going to go through these today in a more, hopefully more engaging way. Now, when we come onto the law module, law is slightly different to other modules because really we're looking at applying legal thoughts. And that has a slightly different process to modules like M80, M81, M92, because really what we're looking at doing is coming to our own decision about a legal concept. So it gives you these additional steps here. So step 1 being identify. So identify which area of the law are we talking about. If you are in the right chapter, this is going to give you a good advantage. And what you might find is the scenarios that are in the question aren't too far away from the types of examples included in the book. You then need to explain it. So explain that law. What does it mean? What is the outcome actually about? And then we want to talk about it in relation to the concept and the question that we have. So the whole scenario that we're looking at here. And then we're going to apply any principles that we have. So any other statutes or case law that we can put into it. And finally, the conclusion. And the conclusion is often what there's a lot of grey areas. And your questions will encourage you to think of grey areas. So law isn't always black and white. it's not going to be a matter of yes, they are liable, no, they are not. You might find that your answer is yes, they are liable if this happens and this happens. However, if we take into consideration this piece, they might no longer be liable. So that you can have ifs and buts in your conclusion within the law. That is absolutely encouraged to show that you've thought about all of the different exceptions in there as well. Now, as we go through this document, and I'm just going to highlight a couple of bits, I will go through how these questions work in a little bit more sort of guidance, but just to give you an idea of what's in here. It's giving you questions and it's giving you an understanding of where they're coming from in the book, and then actual examples of how to answer the question. So once it's given you those answers, then does a little bit more. Lots of answers. There we go. So now it's going to look back at the question and give you the thought process. So if it's shown you how they answered it, now it's saying, these are the things that we wanted to note. So for example, the fact it said explain, and the fact it said explain gives you a guidance of what kind of information they're going to want in that question. And again, I'm going to give you some guidance on this. It's going to tell you how to plan that answer as well. So steps by step in terms of what you should consider specifically for that module. So if you are doing a module like law that's quite different to where you've done maybe an M92, it's worth going in and having a look at this section and just seeing how they might be looking at different types of answers to what you've done in previous ones. And if you are starting coursework from scratch, I'd absolutely recommend you go through this whole document. Okay. Any questions, pop them in to the chat box. Okay, so let's get back into these slides. So, show you what these questions look like. Now, I just want to point out how this works and what the markers are going to consider. And this might sound quite straightforward as I explain it. However, when you're writing your answer and you've found loads of really good content that you want to talk about, you can slightly go and get distracted by the content that you've got rather than thinking back in terms of the numbers we're looking at here. So I do want to really emphasize this piece. Where they are marking your questions, the CII will be giving you really clear guidance as to how your marks are broken down. So here we have one question and the question is worth 20 marks. However, actually, we have 3 questions within the question. So we have one for 12 marks, one for 4 and another for 4. It's really important as you answer the question that you separate it. So you have a section A, you have a section B, and you have a section C. So we don't want one answer that covers all 3 of these. Each one is its own question in its own right. And then we're looking at how the marks are being allocated. So we've got 12 marks that are going to be allocated for section A. And it's telling you that it wants 6, and only 6 of these most important things. So we can look at this and see that we're going to get 2 marks for each of the 6. And we want to make sure that it goes across all 3 lines of defence. So as we're going back through and we're rereading that question and you're ticking yourself off to check you've got your answers, then these are the things you want to be cross-referencing. That you've got 6 and you've explained, which is essentially expanding on just listing those. So you're saying what it is, you're making that statement, you're identifying it, and then you're explaining what it means. And then you're testing that you've also covered off all the lines of defence in this question. So you've got a second half of the question that should be included within those explanations. And then when we go on to question section B here, it's just 4 marks. And we're looking here 2 and 2. So it's telling you exactly where those 4 marks are going to come from. And then here, when we're on to C, it's telling you 2, but you've got 4 marks again. So we now know that for those 2 examples, you want a little bit more information. So we want to make sure that you are weighting and distributing the amount of your words along the lines here as well. So your answer for part A, of course, should be so much longer than for part B and for part C. Even if you feel like there's lots that you want to talk about, focus on what they're going to mark you for. So a couple of things that were in that document that I just want to highlight for you, for those of you that don't want to read the whole thing. Make sure you read the learning outcomes in advance of answering that question. So if you've worked out what chapter it is, go through that chapter beforehand. There might be more than one section that goes back and forth on it. So it might be that there are more than one components in the question that come from different areas of the chapter. So if you go the other way around, if you read the question and find the answer, you might have only found part of the answer, and there might be further in there within that chapter, particularly for law, when you tend to get your ifs and buts later on in the chapter. Make sure that your answer reflects the context of the question. They'll give you scenarios, they'll talk about different individuals, different businesses that are going on, and make sure that the answer that you're putting in there is tailored to what that's talking about. If there's facts and figures, make sure you're using the facts and figures they give you in the question. So avoid the temptation of the facts and figures they're giving you in the book, and make sure you're working them out for yourself in this coursework question. Double check you haven't skipped any questions, and make sure that you've gone through all of the sections that come up within each question. So you're addressing everything that gets raised within it. Another thing that's in that workbook right at the very end is a breakdown of what these words actually mean. So this is telling you what the examiner is looking for. So for example, we have the word explain here. So making something clear and easy to understand with reasoning and or justification, which is quite different to the word discuss. So discussing, we're looking at different ideas, opinions, and then we're weighing up some alternatives. We're having a conversation about it. These words give you a really clear indication of how much you should be talking about based on what's in there. So identify, recognize and name, we're just listing things off. So identify and explain, again, quite different. And the amount of marks you get, you want to consider how that's going to work. Because identify, you might find that you get 4 marks for identifying, or you might get 4 marks for explaining. And those are going to be very different amounts of detail that you're going to go into. Now, when we look at the deadline piece, I would really encourage you to set yourself a deadline quite early on. So you'll get your deadline from the CII. There are, unfortunately, things that happen that get in the way of your CII deadlines that you can't plan for, you can't control. So if you are someone who's deadline driven, that temptation of waiting until a couple of days before can actually end up mean things don't go to plan. So we do get emails from people because maybe their IT's crashed, or sometimes they misread it and thought that the exam, the deadline was the day after the deadline day that they'd put in the email. And people who end up missing out just by a little bit because of concerns around small things that could have been avoided. So I'd really encourage you to give yourself a deadline of a much shorter period of time. Now, there's a Parkinson's law in this one. The more time you give yourself, the more time you'll spend on this coursework. If you give yourself a 2-month deadline, you can get all this coursework done in 2 months. If you allow yourself for 6 months, you'll drag it over the 6 months. So we want to give yourself a deadline that's going to give you some momentum and make sure you move through that coursework at quite some pace. The challenge is, though, the motivation. And if you do find it hard to motivate yourself to get started, then rather than look at it as one big thing, rather than tell yourself, I'm going to do this coursework today, I'm going to finish all of question 5 today, instead tell yourself, I'm going to write 3 lines today. Give yourself a really small target that you can't back out of. Because action creates motivation. Once you start those 3 lines, you'll most likely find that you keep going. You'll stay in it. So don't try and chunk it all off. There's a brilliant phrase. Does anyone want to let me know in the chat box if they know the answer to this one? How do you eat an elephant? If I asked you if you could get through and eat a whole elephant on your own, how would you do it? Let me know in the chat box if you've heard this one before. There we go. One piece, one chunk at a time. Absolutely. So the idea of sitting down and eating a whole elephant is quite unrealistic. But actually, if you were just taking it one piece at a time, giving yourself a rest, coming back to it the next day, bit by bit, you're going to get there. And this coursework, particularly when you've done a couple of these courseworks already, can feel a bit like an elephant. So if you're feeling like a bit tough to get through the whole thing, just set yourself those really small targets and work through it one at a time. Once you've completed it, give yourself a break from it for a few days. And this is why it's good to do this before the deadline day. And then come back and read it. Once you've had a bit of separation from it, you'll read it and you'll read it much clearer. As I can remember this myself, writing coursework, by the time I'd written it out and reread it so many times over a short period, if I then went to reread it and proofread it, I would almost know what the next sentence was going to come and say. I wasn't actually reading it thoroughly. I wasn't focusing on what it said. I was jumping to the conclusion I already had in my head because I'd written it. And then when I go back and look at the coursework a couple of months later, I'm looking at it thinking, what's that? Well, that doesn't even make sense. That's not a sentence. That's not the right use of the word. Because I was looking at it with a fresh pair of eyes, I had a much clearer sight of it. So if you allow yourself the time and the deadline, really recommend giving yourself a break for about a week and then coming back and having another look at it. So there are some steps I've highlighted to you in the section, but I'm just going to highlight these again for you. So within the law, we've got the reviewing piece. So firstly, we want to review the learning outcomes and make sure we've identified the right section of the study text. And then we're identifying the relevant law. We then highlight the instructions within the question. So what is it asking you to do? Consider different views and again, encouraging you to think of grey areas here. How could somebody argue it? If you imagine someone discussing this in court, what would be the argument for and against? You want to be considering both. And you need to be considering both on paper. So it's not necessarily just the decision you come to, but it's a little bit like maths. You get marks for your equation. So you want to be explaining to the marker what thought process you went through to get to the outcome. And then we're applying any cases and so on that we've got in there as well. So simplifying that, identify, explain, apply, conclusion. That's the steps we're going through for the law exam. This guidance is in here as well for each of your different modules. Generally, the rest of them will follow the same theme as each other. It's the law one that just gets a slightly different for you there. Now, when it comes to diploma coursework, there's not much need for you to do referencing because the answers should be in the book, generally speaking, but it is encouraged where they're asking you to look elsewhere, where you have got further information that you can put in some referencing. And again, the CII has some brilliant guidance on this. I'm going to share with you a document. I'll send you a link to this one in the chat as well. And this is the document about all mixed assessment. And it's a frequently asked question. So most questions that you're going to get around your coursework or your exam at diploma level are going to be covered off in here. And this is written, actually, I must say, in a really user-friendly way. It's written more conversational than some of the other documents you might find coming out to do with your qualifications, because they usually have to be very professional. But this is a little bit more just friendly guidance. So this is talking you through essentially why they have the mixed assessment approach, why we've got the coursework in there as well, how the multiple choice exams are working there as well, so it's your MCQs, and what the CII are actually looking for, how they're testing that information. But the real questions you might want to jump to have a look at is, can you resit your assignment? How do you resit your assignment? And what happens if you fail? There's sometimes, and someone do let me know in the chat box if this is something you are going through yourself, but when you do fail the coursework, you can resubmit it. You may find that you want more guidance from the marker as to what you did that could have been better or where you lost the points. And you don't get much information. The reality is you won't get much information, because if they gave you all the information, when you redid the question, wouldn't necessarily be your thought process that was put in, but more the markers. So that is a bit of a challenge with the coursework. When you get the information back, it will be quite vague. So you do need to go back through yourself and have a look through the guidance they've given you, and hopefully, you know, you can work out what question it might be, and then having a look at it with a fresh pair of eyes to see how you might have been able to do it differently. So it's a brilliant piece of information coming through in here that I've shared with you in the chat box as well, if anyone wants to have a look at this piece. So one more thing I will share with you, and let's look at M92, because I keep talking about M05. We'll spread it out a little bit for you all. So those of you that are in our online courses already, and I know a couple of you are, you will see when you go into our online courses, we have lots of videos and ways of making the book come to life. We like to think much more fun way. So you can go through your sections for your syllabus ahead of doing the questions as well. So what I'd really recommend to you, those of you that are in the online course with us, when you go through and you read the chapter in advance, please go through the videos that we have for you here before you're doing the coursework as well. We do have some users who end up using it for the exam and then saying, oh, that would have been helpful for the coursework. It is there to help you learn and understand the book. We do break down the complex concepts in the book into a much more simple way, and that absolutely helps you with coursework. So please don't wait on this one for the exam. Absolutely use it for your coursework as well. And as you get to the end, we have some additional materials in there as well. This seminar itself will be stored for you in here, as well as some other ones which can help you in terms of coursework and multiple choice exams, so achieving ACI in a virtual world, for example. And this one will cover off both of those topics in there as well.